My time says 2 o'clock. Shall we start?
Yes, Salu, go ahead.
Thank you. Greetings, all you feministas, and welcome to our session. My name is Sarudza Njerere, and I will be moderating this session together with Nelandra Mukia. I'm from Zimbabwe. She is from India, from Mumbai. And I want to greet you all in love, power, solidarity, and joy. We are going to start with a performance since this is a festival. Before I go on to introduce to give more fuller welcome remarks. Our performance is coming from the poet and actress Rashida Namulondo from Uganda. She is also a stage director, and she's the founder of the Sophie Mwanika Institute of Art for Change, a non-profit organization using theater for peace building and therapy in vulnerable communities. She was the 2013 Babishai Niwe Poetry Award winner and a Laureate Global Fellow. She was also One Young World Peace Ambassador and the 2019 Community Solutions Program Fellow. So we will now enjoy a recording from Rashida.
They stepped in and cuffed my hands, big black fingers choking, pulling. The streets, the screams, my baby. Cuffs. They suffocate me in my own house. His fingerprints stained my cheeks. In tears, I cried, what's my case? Nature versus a net, he shouts. Cuffs. They suffocate me in office corridors, their fingers lingering, touching, laughing, mocking. They asked me if I could stand for president. I declined. What's your case? They ask. Cuffs. 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 They suffocate me in my own head. They suffocate me in my own house. They suffocate me. Cuffs. Big, black fingers choking, pulling the streets, the screams. My baby. In police custody, I ask, what's my case? The state versus a net, he shouts. Sir, will I get a lawyer, sir? Sir, can I call somebody, sir? Sir, what's the procedure, sir? Sir, can I get a lawyer, sir? Sir, can I call somebody, sir? Sir, do I have a file, sir? Sir, what's the procedure, sir? Shut up! Shut up, Annette. He shouts. The cell, the choking smell, the women, the women, the women. Sir, sir, can I get a lawyer, sir? What's the procedure, sir? Sir, can I get a lawyer, sir? What's the procedure, sir? Sir, can I please get a lawyer, sir? What's the procedure, sir? Shut up! The state versus a net. Big, black fingers choking, pulling, suffocating the streets. My baby. Cuffs. 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 Free me! Free me. Not with a decorative paper that says freedom for women. not in a parliament choked with mockery and foolery. Free me with the words that you teach your sons. Free me with your hands. Don't let them linger, touching, pulling, straining, suffocating. Don't let them linger, touching, pulling, straining, suffocating. Touching, pulling, straining, suffocating. Free me. Free me. Let me fly like a bird. Let me fly like a bird. Cuffs. 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 The women. 6 days. 6 weeks. And I'm still in police custody. I know not my case. I know not the procedure. Free me with information. Let me in. Don't shut me out.
Oh my, that was sent shivers down my spine. And the imagery, I mean, really, that is so great. And you can see that it speaks directly to the topic at hand, confronting hegemonies, neocolonialism, the New World Order. But Rashida herself is here, and she will say a few words to us about her work.
Good evening, everybody. It's afternoon here. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me. All right, great. Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and I'm happy to be here. I'll just talk a little bit about my work and why it was an honor to present this work at this this festival. I think for me personally, I was inspired with this work one day when I visited a police cell, and I was seeing like how many women are in custody and talking to them. None of them had files. None of them knew the procedure anyway. No one knew what to do. And most of these women, you know, would go to the police and they don't have information. And I started looking around at how many women actually don't have information about simple things, like when you get arrested, what's the procedure? Who do you go to? Who do you talk to? What do you need to do? You know, certain things, small things that women did not know how to get themselves out. And I started to realize the more I looked around that as women, we were cuffed by the people who, you know, hold the information. And also how these women are treated in police custody. This also piece is inspired like how women are arrested, the police brutality. Some women like are taken like and never see their families. They never get these calls. Their files are never brought forward. So I felt that I needed to speak to this. I needed to speak to the women that you know find themselves under police custody. And cuffs really represent so many other cuffs besides just that. Like women, we are cuffed. You know, there is a line that says that, you know, in police, they asked me if I could stand for president, and I declined because it's kind of funny how there is this like, okay, you know, you have the right to stand, you know, we've given you the freedom, but you actually haven't. You know, I give a simple situation. If a woman is harassed every day in corridors, if her comments are picking on her, touching her breasts, you know, all these kind of things, they intimidate her. You're already intimidated, and those are cuffs. So while we've moved so far that there is all this freedom, we're still cuffed by certain things, by the fact that men, you know, feel they own our bodies, the fact that, you know, a lot of things, all those cuffs that still exist that we need to break, but most importantly, the cuffs of lack of information, especially in grassroots women. They do not have an idea what to do in certain situations. And usually they say, oh, the information is out there, but it's in books, it's in files, it's in clerk's offices, you know, and no one, these women do not have access to this. So I was really inspired. This story, actually, I observed it. I was in a police cell for 3 days, and I was following up a woman's case who had no idea where to start, and no one was giving her any information of like simply, what's the procedure? How do I get out of here? So I feel like it's very important that women still highlight these cuffs that exist. Originally it was called invisible cuffs because there are a lot of invisible cuffs that exist in our spaces. And yeah, that's what inspired this piece. And I hope that as we move forward, that that the law and people and hierarchy and all these things know that they need to give women information. They need to break it down. It's their right. And also that they need to protect women from like these invisible castes, these castes that still choke us, that they say they have cleared, but they actually have not. They still exist. Yeah, so that's what really inspired this piece. I could take any questions if I still have time. I can't hear you.
Unmute, Saru.
I think we'll do questions at once towards the end.
Okay, all right.
Yes, but thank you so much. That was so moving. Just a few things. We have participants from Africa, Asia Pacific, America, and we all have different languages. So we have a translation available. I think if you go, there is a button that should say interpretation, and then you can choose the language that you want to hear the session in. And as I said, we will have a question and answer session when the panelists have spoken, and all we ask in love, power, solidarity, and joy is that when we are speaking, we speak respectfully to each other. So welcome really to this South Feminist Futures session on neocolonialism, a new world order. I'm going to now hand over to my co-moderator, Nilangela, who's going to, I think, introduce the panelists.
Thank you so much, Saru, and thank you everyone for joining us. I just want to say that you can ask, you can share your thoughts on chat. Tell us who you are, where you're joining from in chat, and use the Q&A function for any questions that you might have for the panelists or even the organizers. Just a quick overview of the session topic. This session sits under the theme, as if you've been joining the festival, we have daily themes. This session sits under the theme Confronting Hegemonies, and the session title is Neocolonialism, the New World Order, ? So it seems to us it's the New World Order, but we are asking whether it is. And one of the tasks as South feminists of Confronting Hegemonies and South feminists from the formerly colonized nations is to understand that neocolonialism began as nations in the global South started to gain their formal independence, as Sylvia Tamale has said in her new book that she'll also speak to, and that it continues even today through the dominance of the Bretton Woods institutions, transnational corporations, extractivism, appropriation of Southern peoples, women, trans and non-binary peoples' labor. And in the last few years, we've seen hyper-globalization and finance capital in collusion with fascism, xenophobia, misogyny, queer and transphobic regimes across the world, entrenching. So we are asking the question whether it's entrenching itself as the New World Order. How does coloniality impinge on economic, ecological, sexual, political sovereignty and self-determination? And what does a South feminist decolonization agenda look like? So what we're going to do in this session is that we are absolutely thrilled to have Sylvia Tamale, Professor Sylvia Tamale, and Alejandra Santillana join us. Sylvia, as you know, Sylvia, as you know, is a leading African feminist and a multidisciplinary scholar based in Makerere University's law school in Uganda. She was the first female dean of law in Uganda and has been a visiting professor at several universities, including Oxford, Pretoria, and Zimbabwe. Professor Tamale combines academia with activism and adopts a critical approach to the law that aims at enhancing students' transformative personal growth and agency. She is the author of numerous publications, including her latest book, that we'll see reference today, Decolonization and Afrofeminism, which was launched in 2020. She holds a Bachelor of Law from Makerere University, a master's in law from Harvard University, and a PhD in sociology and feminist studies from the University of Minnesota. I am going to ask Professor Tumale to speak to these questions of neocolonialism, coloniality, and decolonization. She is the keynote speaker in this session, and then we are going to bring in Alejandra to speak to the same questions or similar questions from the perspective of Latin America, and I'll introduce Alejandra before she speaks. I'm going to hand over to Professor Tumale. We are thrilled. Please go for it.
Hello, hi everyone. I'd like to, I'm so excited to be here, and thank you, Rashida, for that fantastic poem. Very moving indeed. I'd like to thank South Feminist Futures for this invitation to share my thoughts at this festival discussing our feminist vision for the future. Initiatives like South Feminist Futures, that is SFF, which marry Southern voices, are long overdue. In Africa, we established the African Feminist Forum, that is AFF, 14 years ago as a platform for engaging academics and activists to discuss our context-specific issues as feminists on the continent. And that is the feminists on the continent that is internationally and geopolitically constructed as a bounty and not a player, with its people deemed to be objects of discourse and not subjects of their own history. The continent that is viewed as consisting of shithole countries. I see SFF as a necessary next step of the regional initiative to AFF to discuss our common struggles and our common futures as feminists in the global South. The biggest mistake we can possibly make is to focus on ideologies that exaggerate our differences and stereotypes that act as barriers to our collective action. Exaggerated differences based on our skin color, on physical characteristics, on languages or our accents, and on other demographic or social cultural variables to justify hierarchies. Neocolonialism and neoliberal capitalism pisses on quote unquote people of color the same way regardless of where we are located. Africa, South Asia, Asia Pacific, the Caribbean, Latin America, or even in the global North. There are several common threads that link the global South, which arise from our shared historical experiences of colonization, displacement, gendered racism, and imperialism. All the links that arise from our shared traditions of communitarianism and interconnectedness. Very few people in the global South know the full story of our past, let alone these historical links. SFF is a perfect space to highlight these histories and herstories, to restore our dignity and humanity, to reinvent our lives free of manipulated colonial structures, discourses, and identities. For me, the Southern feminist decolonization and decolonial agenda should first and foremost strive to incubate and seek clarity on key relevant issues. What we need is clarity. Clarity about the exaggerations and their rationalizations, clarity about our common goals, clarity about our strategies for confronting patriarchy, neocolonialism, and deconstructing the neoliberal understanding of development and progress. Clarity of jargonistic language, communication, and thinking. Clarity about our histories. For example, it is a shame that we learn about the French Revolution of 1789 to 1799, but not the Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804. At least it's not on our, this largest and most successful slave rebellion, which toppled French colonialism, is not on our formal syllabus here in Uganda, and I'm sure in many other parts of Africa. Creativity in delivering our messages is also key. Listening and hearing each other across the colonial exaggerated differences. Learning to unlearn hegemonic Eurocentric narratives and Eurocentric, quote unquote, common sense. We need to reconceptualize our ways of thinking, of knowing, and of being. Align our practices with our own values and beliefs. Clarity should also extend to the vision, values, and goals of SFF. Such clarity should leave no ambiguity about the nature and function of this animal called SFF. I think that our main target for creating awareness should, in a very aggressive way, be the youth. We know that formal education only reinforces Eurocentric hegemonies and colonial discourses. So I'm hoping that one of the objectives of SFF is to create counter narratives for students and the youth for greater clarity. We must break the habit of preaching to the converted and kicking at open doors. So I'm very excited to see that SFF has already thought about ways of overcoming some communication barriers that may stand in our way by adopting various methods of, including art, poetry, dialogue, reflection, and so on. This is extremely important if we are to rise above the constructed walls that separate us as the marginalized in the global South. As we embark on our collective discussions under this SFF umbrella, we must acknowledge the tremendous work that has been undertaken in the past. There are hundreds of scholars, activists, and change agents before us that have articulated issues of decolonization and decoloniality. Southern scholars such as Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Sheikh Anta Diop, Leopold Sedar Senghor, Walter Rodney, Samir Amin, Edward Said, Issa Shivji, Anibal Kijano, Walter Mignolo, Franz Fanon, and so on and so on. The majority have been focusing on the complexities of racial and class injustices and ignoring intersecting power structures based on gender. But increasingly, we are hearing more and more feminist voices from the global South, articulating on issues of decolonization and decoloniality. These include Gayatri Spivak, Chandra Mohanty, Linda Tuhiwai Smith, Fatma Manisi, Oyeronke Oyewumi, Maria Lugons, Sasis Mandez, Nkiru Nzegu, Amina Mama, and a host of African American feminists. I'm sure that there are many more that we don't know about. The SFF should expose to us more Southern feminist scholarship, whose access we are routinely denied through the commodification and appropriation of knowledge by multinational corporations, which erect barriers to open access. I addressed many of these issues in my recent book, Decolonization and Afrofeminism, and I'm happy to share a PDF copy with whoever is interested. Nilanjana requested me to briefly discuss the main themes of the book. My main inspiration for writing the book was to reflect on how we can pursue the Afrofeminist project using a decolonial approach. How do we shift our ways of knowing, ways of thinking, and our ways of being without undergoing a brain transplant? How do we undo the centuries-old damage wrought by imperialism and begin rewiring our senses to align them with decolonial feminist politics? It was obvious to me that the first thing we needed to do was to clearly identify the problem. So again, clarity. The book adds its voice to the growing number of sources that are lifting the ideological veil which shrouds our understanding of the nature of the problems that we are dealing with. This afternoon, I'll use some extracts from the book to make my arguments. Although the book focuses on Africa as a region, most of the arguments are also true for much of the global South. And I have replaced Africa with the South in some extracts. Most of us have been running this emancipatory race, including us feminists. We've been running this emancipatory race with a blurred black and white vision, using the wrong tools, employing the wrong methods, guided by skewed theoretical compasses, and celebrating half-baked victories. So one of the aims of this book was to contribute to the grand project of shifting our collective consciousness, move us towards a more vivid technicolor vision of the structural problems that we need to tackle, to cast their contours in sharper relief and filter out the confusing colonial and neocolonial noises, so that we can get on with the serious business of reclaiming our humanity as people from the global South, and especially as women. The prefix neo in the term neocolonialism simply means new. Hence, neocolonialism simply refers to a new form of colonialism other than the one where the imperialists appropriated physical land from quote unquote natives and maintained their hegemony or dominance. Today, although our countries received formal independence with with new flags and national anthems, the reality is that we are still under the stranglehold of imperialism and capitalism. Imperialism and capitalism gave birth to colonialism, which has been kindled and sustained by the logic of fraud, lies, brutal repression, pillage, exploitation, and manipulation. Lies are spread through the power of language and discourse. Using tools such as mass media, education, religion, and the law, colonialists constructed narratives of white supremacy and Black inferiority, male supremacy and female inferiority. Africa is portrayed as a backwater of failed states, trapped in the vortex of underdevelopment. The colonial machinery never goes to sleep and is extremely efficient. It is always in search of new ways of reinventing itself. Its main functions are twofold: to continue exploiting neocolonies and to maintain the political economic enslavement necessary for its own existence. In short, the imperialists may be using different methods of exploitation and oppression, but they continue to piss on us, and their pee smells exactly the same as of old. And what do we mean by coloniality? The concept is closely related to colonialism, but goes beyond the mere acquisition and political control of another country. It explains the long-standing patterns of power that resulted from European colonialism, including knowledge production and the establishment of social orders. It is the colonization of our minds. As South African professor Ndlovu Gatsheni tells us, it is the invisible power structure that sustains colonial relations of exploitation and domination long after the end of direct colonialism, end quote. Our colonization and decolonial efforts have largely been, simply picking at the scabs of the deep scars that colonialism and coloniality left in their wake. The unhealed scars are still seen in the linear shapes of our boundaries that make up different nation states, in its legal, political, and educational systems, as well as religious institutions. They are evident as the invisible tentacles that drive and direct our economies. We experience them as internalized discourses of power and submission in its people's social, political, and religious lives. The work of decolonization and decolonial rethinking must entail much more than band-aid approaches for such complex wounds as those left by our colonial histories, beginning with fully appreciating the structural, institutional, and psychological linkages that still link Africa to Western neocolonial interests and exploitation, or that still link the global South to Western neocolonial interests and exploitation. So the book attempts to make a decolonial analysis of some dominant constructs, such as sex, gender, sexuality, customary law, human rights, gender equality, and family law. It uses decolonial lenses to illuminate the justice-oriented tools such as intersectionality, transdisciplinarity, and Ubuntu that can open up pathways for new forms of knowledge and different ways of knowing. It challenges paradigms that are founded on polarized dualisms, such as male versus female, or public versus private, and so forth, which only heighten adversarial camps. It further critiques the African higher education architecture, whose roots lie deep in colonialism, and suggests ways for a reconceived and revitalized Pan-African movement. It also highlights the new phenomenon of digital colonialism, which is part of the new Berlin-like scramble for Africa. And by the way, some of the countries involved in this latest scramble include countries from the global south, such as India and Brazil. The book advocates for the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which can best be translated as humaneness or respect for the collective, as opposed to the individual, which lies at the core of the Western notion of human rights. Interdependence and compassion are the bedrock on which communities are built. It's usually described in the maxim, I am because we are. As a philosophy, the ever-evolving system of Ubuntu values an individual within a larger context of the whole community. While Ubuntu does not deny the importance of individuality, it lays a much heavier emphasis on the value of community. It values unity in diversity. A number of Southern philosophers distinguish the importance of community to non-Western people, as opposed to the autonomous individualism common in many of the dominant philosophies found in Western societies. They call for a re-engagement with indigenous forms of living, knowing, and being. And it is time for us as feminists to take heed of them and follow suit. Our formal education systems and colonial religions are especially implicated in colonizing our minds. For students to appreciate the challenges that we face today, they cannot afford to be trained with a frog's eye view of the world. It is necessary to see the big picture of the world from the perspective of the hawk, to connect dots. This can only be done by connecting knowledge from disciplines as diverse as mathematics, archaeology, history, literature, economics, physics, religious studies, political science, medicine, and so on. When we examine the jurisprudence of equality protection from around the world, numerous contradictions and complexities arise from the fact that systemic domination is inscribed into the legal frameworks and institutions of our post-colonial, quote-unquote, countries. The visionary constitutional aspirations of equality never translate into substantive equality on the ground. In the book, I argue that we need to unwed our conceptual thinking from Western social ideals, particularly the emphasis on individualism, and begin viewing our indigenous cultures as legitimate analytical frameworks. Rather than fight for gender equality, it makes more sense to struggle against those institutions and structures that engender women's subjugation, that diminish their status and denigrate their gender roles. Our traditions equip us with useful tools that we can use to achieve gender justice. Ubuntu is simply one of them. I'm sure in all our different cultures, we have the equivalent of Ubuntu. Its moral and ethical foundation requires one to respect others if one is to respect him or herself. It also calls for respect for human dignity, all being core goals of Afrofeminism. Ecofeminism is an important pillar of a decolonial feminist approach to reconstructing the global South. Our indigenous conceptions of interconnectivities go beyond human relations to include nature. They disrupt the nature-culture dualism. The book discusses the link between gender and ecological justice, which provides a different framework for analyzing coloniality as it relates to both social, and environmental issues. Indigenous knowledge systems, which are usually in tune with nature, can be deployed to address environmental injustices using an integrative view of nature and people. For centuries, people in the Global South have celebrated the values which connect past and present, as well as humans and nature. Indeed, women in the Global South may not have self-identified as quote-unquote eco-feminists, but they have a long history of ecological consciousness and moral obligation towards future generations. The more recent and famous examples can be seen in the women-led Chipko. This is Hindi for embrace. In this case, embrace the tree. The Chipko movement in India of the early 1970s, and the women-led Green Belt movement founded in Kenya in 1977. In the Global North, French feminists were the first to coin the term ecofeminism, linking issues of gender oppression to the phenomenon of men's domination of nature. But the term essentially describes a new name for an ancient wisdom. Ecofeminism mimics and recycles ancient Southern wisdom. As imperialists renew and escalate their recolonization efforts, Southern feminists must sharpen their struggles against the foundations of colonialism and address gender, socioeconomic, political, and ecological justice. Before such a journey can be commenced, there is need to clearly understand how the colonial and neocolonial systems work. The macro logics of imperialism and liberalism are deployed to quote unquote other and subjugate the South and its people, while the micro operations of modernity and coloniality shape local contexts. The continent needs, here let me talk about the Global South. The Global South needs to employ anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, and feminist approaches to successfully challenge the existing world order. In order for our decolonization and decolonial efforts to succeed, we must come to terms with new forms of power that neoliberal capitalism has deployed in its quest for survival. Digital colonialism combines the predatory extractive practices of historical colonialism with the abstract quantification methods of computing. It involves processes where large-scale tech companies extract, analyze, and own user data for profit and market influence with nominal benefits to the data source. Here I want to very quickly quote from the whistleblower Edward Snowden, from his autobiography, Permanent Record, where he narrates how the US intelligence agencies keep a permanent record of the metadata collected from our digital footprint, such as smartphones, computers, and the various internet platforms. And I quote, "Metadata is data about data. It is, more accurately, data that is made by data, a cluster of tags and markers that allow data to be useful. The most direct way of thinking about metadata, however, is as activity data. All the records of all the things you do on your devices and all the things your devices do on their own. Take a phone call, for example. Its metadata might include the date and time of the call, the call's duration, the number from which the call was made, the number being called, and their locations. Metadata can tell your surveillant the address you slept at last night and what time you got up this morning. It reveals every place you visited during your day and how long you spent there. It shows who you were in touch with and who was in touch with you. In sum, metadata can tell your surveillant virtually everything they ever want or need to know about you, except what's actually going on inside your head, end quotes. Scary. Hence, big tech corporations extract or harvest the personal data from our digital footprint to manipulate all aspects of our lives and invade our privacy in ways that we are not aware of. For example, in Africa, by 2030, the plan is that colonialism will have the capacity to continuously and autonomously collect and transmit data about Africans within privately controlled systems of uncertain security. And this move has the full support of the African Union. Digitization has become the new civilizing, quote unquote, mission and the latest framework for rationalizing the new mode of colonization. Developing the broadband infrastructure is equivalent to the construction of imperial railways in the 19th century in order to facilitate the colonization of Africa. Is the continent in a position to resist the darkest side of digitization and datafication? And I would ask the same question about the Global South generally. How can the lives of billions of people avoid being appropriated and turned into a mega digital laboratory? Finally, and most importantly, I think Southern feminists must work as a bloc. I think that in order to be effective, it is extremely important, that our strategic and intersectional efforts must find space to build alliances and coalitions with social justice groups around the world across systems of domination. Not only do the social, economic, environmental, and ideological dimensions of the decolonization project require SFF to work as a bloc, but they also necessitate the South to link up with the dispossessed masses in the global North to break the capitalist patriarchal hegemony. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Jamala. That was absolutely a sweeping analysis. And of course, thank you also. I just want to say first, thank you for offering to share your book, the PDF of your book. That is anti-capitalist and sounds solidarity, isn't it? And very feminist. So thank you for offering that. And thank you so much for that sweeping analysis. Thank you for the call for clarity, the call for sort of looking at ideologies and dismantling ideologies, hegemonies. That was absolutely, I'm not going to carry on. I took notes like I used to in university. That was very, very, very brilliant. Thank you so much. I am going to ask Alejandra to come in, and before that, I will, Alejandra, do switch on your video and show yourself so that we know you're here. Alejandra Santillana or Santillana Ortiz is a PhD student at Universidad Autónoma de Mexico, UNAM, and she is working on her thesis about political history of Ecuador's left during the 70s and the 80s. She's part of the feminist confluence of the World Social Forum of Transformative Economies, Dawn Global South Feminist Network, Virginia Bolton Open Lectures, and the Feminist Forum Against G20. Alejandra has been involved in popular education for women and in indigenous communities. She has contributed to academia and learning spaces. She is at the Institute of Ecuadorian Studies and the Observatory of Rural Changes, where she is a coordinator, Rural Changes Coordinator, where she's currently an associate researcher. Alejandra, I want to welcome you, and I want you to bring in perspectives from Latin America around the same themes of neocolonialism, coloniality, and decolonization. And particularly given the contributions of Latin American feminist scholars on gender, sexuality, and coloniality, I hope that you would reflect on that, and do please feel free to respond to Sylvia's address as well. I welcome you, Alejandra, and thank you so much, Alejandra.
Hola, buenos días. Thank you so much for inviting me. I will speak in Spanish, so thank you for the translation also. Bueno, mi nombre es Alejandra Santillana, yo soy peruano-ecuatoriana y les voy a hablar un poco desde la perspectiva de América Latina, que son reflexiones siempre colectivas, ¿no? Quisiera un poco dialogar también con lo que acaba de plantear Silvia, la profesora Silvia. Creo que es fundamental que miremos este momento actual del proyecto del capital, ¿no? Del capital, el patriarcado y la colonialidad. Este es un momento donde, digamos, estamos asistiendo a un tiempo parecido a la acumulación originaria del capital. Es decir, vemos una exacerbación del trabajo sobreexplotado, de una precarización de las condiciones laborales y también de aquello que Rita Segato, digamos, denomina como dueñidad, ¿no? Que es este proceso no solo de concentración de la riqueza, sino este momento como cuasi medieval donde hay pocos dueños en el mundo, cada vez menos, de riquezas, tierras, cuerpos, decisiones, países y demás, ¿no? Es un momento en donde la misma función del Estado-Nación se pone en revisión precisamente por la sobredeterminación del capital y de los intereses de las grandes empresas transnacionales, ¿no? Y es un momento en donde también nos recuerda a todas esas décadas de ese siglo de acumulación originaria de violencia y crueldad. Violencia y crueldad que obviamente es diferenciada y fundamentalmente es para los pueblos del sur global y para las mujeres y los cuerpos feminizados. Pero al mismo tiempo, este es un momento de automatización y de una forma cuasi abstracta en donde se presenta el capital, no solamente como este trabajo, digamos, explotado, sino como un momento en donde las riquezas están relacionadas, o la acumulación de riqueza en el mundo está relacionada con la economía de plataformas, con el capital bancario y con la desmaterialización del trabajo, ¿no? Entonces, es un momento que hay que mirarlo con mucho detenimiento, precisamente porque nos presenta no solo contradicciones, sino ambivalencias de cómo entendemos el capitalismo en el mundo. Ambas situaciones están ligadas de manera determinante en el sur global, ¿no? Este proyecto de las élites, digamos, que inicia entre los 70s y los 80s, digamos, como una profundización del sentido capitalista del mundo y que implicó el aumento de las tasas de ganancia de las élites globales, digamos, ¿no? Élites que básicamente son del norte, digamos, y de los grandes países, digamos, protoimperialistas o imperialistas, nos muestra, ¿no es cierto?, este proyecto que podríamos denominar un primer neoliberalismo y que ahora se asienta sobre un segundo momento neoliberal, digamos, a pesar de que hay continuidades, también hay algunas diferencias. Es un proyecto que finalmente está sentado sobre la exacerbación y el aumento de las tasas de ganancia, ¿no? Y esas tasas de ganancia están vinculadas directamente con la renta diferenciada de la tierra, con el subsidio que implica el trabajo no remunerado, fundamentalmente en manos de las mujeres, con un saqueo de la clase trabajadora, ¿no? Y también con un proceso de despojo, ¿no? Es un proceso de acumulación por despojo exacerbado que está directamente relacionado con las tierras y los territorios del sur global y obviamente con nuestros cuerpos, ¿no? En ese sentido, pensando en también lo que decía la profesora Silvia, ¿no? Esta división internacional del trabajo implica efectivamente una geopolítica de la diferencia en clave neoliberal. Esta idea de que se reactivan y exageran las diferencias y al mismo tiempo se localizan esas diferencias nos muestra efectivamente que el capitalismo, el patriarcado y la colonialidad han sido expertos en construir de la diferencia procesos de jerarquización entre nosotras, ¿no? Esos procesos de jerarquización que definen qué es lo humano, qué no, qué es la civilización, qué no, qué es el progreso, qué no, etcétera, se ven acentuados en este momento del capitalismo, ¿no? Esta geopolítica de la diferencia en clave neoliberal nos muestra además que los extractivismos y la configuración de territorios están vinculados tanto con un proceso de aumento de la tasa de ganancia en el capital financiero global y de despojo de la tierra, ¿no? Es un proceso de contrarreforma agraria acelerado, pero al mismo tiempo nos muestra cómo este proyecto va configurando subjetividades, formas de hacer, formas de pensar, formas de sentir, formas de relacionarnos. Este orden y esta normalidad vendría a ser justamente esta hegemonía contra la que nosotras, digamos, como feministas del sur global, luchamos, ¿no? Que es una hegemonía que no solamente está en la clave de la reproducción, digamos, o el control de la reproducción de la vida y el aumento de la tasa de ganancias de las empresas, sino que tiene que ver con formas de producir, de relacionarnos, de construir pensamientos, saberes, formas, ¿no es cierto? Y también afectos, ¿no? Hay una economía política de los afectos determinada por el neoliberalismo y el consumo. En ese sentido, digamos, esta colonización, o sea, o pensar la hegemonía en clave de colonización es importante no solo porque nos remite a procesos y a hechos coloniales, digamos, de nuestros países que fueron colonizados por Europa fundamentalmente, ¿no? Tanto África, digamos, la India, Asia y América Latina fueron, digamos, territorios conquistados en donde el proceso de la colonización, como bien dicen aquí, digamos, y entiendo que también en diálogo, y eso me parece maravilloso, en diálogo con la producción justamente del sur global, que no es latinoamericano, pero la discusión sobre el concepto de colonialidad, del poder, del trabajo, de los afectos que imprime Aníbal Quijano y que después es retomado por varias feministas en una discusión también sobre lo que implica el trabajo, los cuerpos, la corporalidad, nos muestra finalmente que este proceso de hegemonía tiene que ver con un hecho colonial que se reactualiza permanentemente, es decir, hay una forma colonial en nuestras sociedades, justamente por la División Internacional del Trabajo, pero también es un proceso de colonización sobre nuestros cuerpos que finalmente son el territorio de exacerbación y construcción de los intereses de las empresas transnacionales, ¿no? Y eso vemos también, digamos, y eso creo que es importante para el debate de ahora, hay un proceso finalmente y una capacidad del capitalismo y del relato del capital también de vaciar de contenido nuestras discusiones como movimiento feminista. Ya en los años 70, cuando hubo un proceso de discusión radical, digamos, en relación y potente en relación a qué pasaba con, digamos, las dinámicas del trabajo no remunerado y de cuidados como un proceso de transferencia, digamos, de valor hacia el sostenimiento del capitalismo, ¿no es cierto?, tanto como orden social histórico, pero también como una forma capital-trabajo. Vimos luego como en el ajuste con la conformación del neoliberalismo en los años 70, 80, tenemos también instituciones aparentemente democráticas como Naciones Unidas y tal, ¿no es cierto?, que lo que hacen es incorporar esta discusión de los feminismos, vaciarla de contenido, arrojarnos a la idea de que lo que necesitamos es entrar al mercado laboral asalariado, ¿no es cierto?, sin una reorganización social de los cuidados, y en donde se vacía de contenido mucho de nuestro relato. Estamos ahora asistiendo, yo creería, al menos en América Latina, a un proceso de movilización potente, radical de los feminismos. Al menos eso era hasta la pandemia, hasta antes de la pandemia. Y este movimiento feminista potente, radical en el sentido de que cuestiona las relaciones de lo dado, cuestiona las relaciones históricas y propone una transformación y no solamente una crítica, es justamente un momento en donde podríamos pensar en que uno de los grandes retos que tenemos nosotras como feministas del sur global es la no domesticación del movimiento una vez más. Es decir, ¿cómo hacemos para que entre nosotras la idea de la transformación esté vinculada con la justicia social para nosotras, cuerpos feminizados, identidades sexogenéricas y nuestros propios pueblos, digamos, del sur? Y no entramos en la retórica, digamos, liberal del feminismo blanqueado que pretende permanentemente incorporarnos a el relato del emprendimiento, por ejemplo, de la paridad y la alternancia, por ejemplo, en clave política. No estamos desconociendo la importancia de las luchas feministas y de las mujeres en la participación política, pero sí estamos cuestionando si ese es nuestro único horizonte y si ese es el horizonte de liberación y de emancipación que nosotras en este momento del mundo estamos buscando. En ese sentido, digamos, esta colonización de nuestros cuerpos y este intento permanente de blanqueamiento y domesticación del movimiento feminista nos arroja a otro tema, ¿no? Y que tiene que ver con la pervivencia y, digamos, como el acuerdo entre el capital transnacional y los grupos ultraconservadores, que al menos en América Latina es un tema fundamental, es decir, no solamente con golpes de Estado, sino con procesos electorales en donde millones de personas votan por alguien como Bolsonaro en Brasil, ¿no? O sea, estamos asistiendo también a un proceso que llaman muchos compañeros aquí en el Ecuador, Acción Antifascista, lo denomina fascistización de la sociedad, y que finalmente lo que nos muestra es una vinculación entre una colonización de nuestros cuerpos, ¿no? En varias claves. En América Latina la colonización de los cuerpos tiene que ver tanto con el control de la reproducción de la fuerza del trabajo, por lo tanto la negación al derecho a interrumpir embarazos no deseados, y por eso también estoy utilizando el pañuelo verde, porque nos hacemos eco de la marea verde argentina. Esta semana es clave para las compañeras y las hermanas argentinas. El 10 de diciembre se vota, pero además de eso es clave porque la marea verde es un eco y una luz para el resto de América Latina. Somos un continente en donde el aborto está penalizado, en muchos países está penalizado en todas sus causales, inclusive en casos de violación. Y esa es una de las muestras de cómo un derecho tan básico como es el de decidir sobre nuestros cuerpos y decidir cuál es nuestro futuro y nuestro presente todavía nos sigue siendo negado. Pero a la par eso se mezcla y eso se articula con procesos de vientres de alquiler, de mujeres del sur global o en que están en situaciones, digamos, de no poder, o aparentemente en la estructura, digamos, esterilizaciones forzadas, ¿no? La memoria de las esterilizaciones forzadas de la población indígena en América Latina es también ejemplo de la colonización sobre nuestros cuerpos. La pregunta ahí detrás parece ser quiénes y cómo se reproducen y quiénes definen la reproducción de la fuerza del trabajo, en qué características, en qué momentos y de acuerdo a qué intereses del proyecto de las élites nacionales o transnacionales. Esa colonización de los cuerpos también vemos en todos los procesos de control de la alimentación y por eso es fundamental que también las feministas del sur global sigamos luchando por una discusión sobre soberanía alimentaria, agua y bienes comunes, ¿no? Ahora, por ejemplo, en el Ecuador, el día de hoy, el gobierno neoliberal de Moreno va a firmar una primera fase de un tratado de libre comercio con los Estados Unidos, y eso significa obviamente la muerte de nuestro sistema productivo agrícola y también significa un envenenamiento de la clase trabajadora. Vemos como México, por ejemplo, que es uno de los primeros países que firman tratados de libre comercio en América Latina, tiene una de las poblaciones con más problemas de salud, obesidad, diabetes, consumo de Coca-Cola, etc. Eso es lo que implica para nosotros también estos procesos de tratado de libre comercio y eso también es una discusión de colonización. Es sí interrupción de embarazos, es sí control sobre nuestros cuerpos y nuestros derechos a decidir, pero también tiene que ver con un proceso de colonización de nuestras aguas, de nuestros territorios, de nuestras formas de comer, de nuestras formas de relacionarnos, ¿no? En ese sentido, el debate sobre la salud y los bienes comunes es otro de los debates estratégicos del movimiento feminista, digamos, y mucho más del sur global, en donde no están garantizados precisamente y siempre hay una amenaza y una precarización permanente de los sistemas públicos. Eso lo vimos en la pandemia, eso lo estamos viviendo en nuestros países, ¿no? En ese sentido, la clase trabajadora, la población en general, las mujeres empobrecidas, los cuerpos feminizados, las compañeras trans, y al mismo tiempo, ¿no es cierto?, están sometidas a una muerte lenta por la vía de la salud y el despojo de la salud, y a una forma funcional de domesticación y silenciamiento, ¿no? Esa fascistización de la sociedad en continentes como América Latina implica una retórica de celebración de la conquista española de América y por lo tanto de una justificación de la colonización, y en ese sentido, digamos, si hay algo que está ocurriendo nuevamente en esto de qué es lo nuevo y la neocolonización, es esta reivindicación, digamos, de la colonia y de la conquista de América Latina por estos grupos ultraconservadores, ¿no? Y quisiera ahí pasar, digamos, ya para dejar, digamos, la posibilidad justamente del debate, quisiera plantear algunos de los elementos que me parecen centrales en un proceso de discusión entre los feminismos globales del sur. Por un lado, creo que los feminismos y, digamos, el movimiento de mujeres necesita plantearse o seguir, digamos, acentuando su carácter no solo anticapitalista, antiimperialista, sino, como decía Silvia, antirracista, pero también antifascista. Sí creemos que en este momento una de las banderas tiene que ser la discusión de la fascistización de la sociedad y también del debate sobre la xenofobia. En América Latina hay muchos países, digamos, en donde las propias crisis económicas han implicado éxodos y migraciones forzadas, y hay un proceso de reactivación de la xenofobia también en nuestros países, por ejemplo, contra los hermanos centroamericanos en México o contra venezolanos, haitianos, ¿no?, cubanos en países como el Ecuador. Esa xenofobia que es utilizada por los grupos y las élites para construir un relato del enemigo externo que llega a, ¿no es cierto?, a ponernos en crisis, es algo que las feministas también tenemos que, digamos, combatir. Otro de los elementos tiene que ver la rediscusión de tratados de libre comercio y megatratados. ¿Cuál es la participación de los organismos multilaterales, Fondo Monetario, Banco Mundial, lo que discutíamos en el 2018, el G20 para nuestros países? Es decir, ¿cuál es la característica de esta apuesta que tienen estos espacios, estos foros económicos de las grandes potencias, y cuál es el lugar que nosotras tenemos en ese proyecto, ¿no? Sobre todo cuando muchos de esos espacios tienen como rostro a mujeres que nos están contando el cuento del emprendedurismo y de la necesidad de la profundización del capitalismo. Mujeres generalmente blancas que vienen a contarle a América Latina, a África, a Asia, ¿no es cierto?, qué es lo que tenemos que hacer para superar el patriarcado, ¿no es cierto?, a punta de voluntad, como si es que el patriarcado no tuviera nada que ver con las estructuras de colonialidad y de capitalismo en nuestros países. Otro de los elementos que me parece central es el debate de la renta. ¿Cómo vamos y ahí creo que necesitamos pensar en unos feminismos no solo insubordinados, sino rupturistas, que ponen en jaque la discusión de la renta, digamos, de las empresas y cómo desmontamos la renta y los procesos de ganancia que tienen, ¿no es cierto?, el capital en nuestros espacios de la vida, ya sean datos, ya sea tierra, ¿no?, y demás. En ese sentido, la autonomía sigue siendo un debate fundamental. Y esa autonomía, ¿no es cierto?, tiene que ver con dos debates que en América Latina se están dando desde el movimiento feminista, y es la propiedad privada y la discusión de propiedades colectivas, y también los procesos de endeudamiento privado y no solamente de los estados. Hay un agresivo proceso de endeudamiento, como señalan Verónica Gago y Lucy Caballero en sus discusiones sobre la deuda y la perspectiva feminista de la deuda. Y finalmente, a mí me parece que hay dos elementos más que deberíamos entrar a discutir, y es los procesos al interior del movimiento feminista, que no solamente se blanquean, sino que hay unos debates muy complejos que se están dando en contra, digamos, de las compañeras trans en la discusión sobre el trabajo sexual y el abolicionismo, y eso nos remite efectivamente a una discusión no solamente de la disputa del sentido histórico en clave contrahegemónica, sino también a una discusión del poder, como decía Silvia. El poder, en donde yo creo que ahí no solamente necesitamos seguir ahondando en una discusión sobre el Estado, sino también el construir política entre nosotras. ¿Cómo construimos una política que no sea en clave masculina y tampoco de la democracia burguesa procedimental? ¿Cómo discutimos una política entre nosotras que incluya el cuidado en su dimensión política y no solo en la reproducción social. Cómo construimos tiene que ver con un método, con una estrategia, con una táctica. Y finalmente, y agradecerles por este espacio, creo que es necesario que estas discusiones, estos encuentros entre feministas del sur global sean más seguidos. Necesitamos leernos más. Yo sé que el lenguaje es un problema, pero hay que caminar a ver cómo hacemos para seguir reconociendo esos saberes que las mujeres hemos ido construyendo en diálogo con nuestros pueblos digamos, en el transcurso del feminismo. Y creo que ahí necesitamos tal vez caminar quizás a una especie de pacto feminista del sur global, en donde tengamos algunos acuerdos. Quizás el método para no caer en la exageración de las diferencias que nos fragmentan es partir de lo común y luego gestionar la diferencia. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Ale. Thank you so much. I know that we don't have much. I'm not going to say anything. We don't have much time, although we don't have anything in the Q&A, but maybe Saru, you can help with facilitating the comments or questions that people might have.
All right. Thank you. I want to thank all our panelists. It has exceeded expectations. I always said I wanted to be an attendee so that I could just sit and at your feet and learn, but I was here I am as a moderator. Rashida, your poem, I'm still thinking about it. The confluence of the spoken word and the visual material, and how it tagged so perfectly to what we are discussing. Because when we look at the issue of imprisonment, whether be it imprisonment of women or of men, it is very much tied to colonialism and I know in my own where I come from, we did not have prison, so they brought their justice system, which is shrouded in archaic language, which we cannot understand, and basically we then are coerced into this system, which continues to oppress us, and yet we don't have the information, and so we get the feeling of suffocation. So thank you very much for that poem, because we have. For me, the question is answered. Are we looking at neocolonialism? Is this the new global world order? Is it the new form of domination? And for me, the answer is very simple. And anyone, I think, who sees and hears your poem will be of the same agreement that indeed we are. And I want to encourage participants to go to the question and answer function and put in their questions. I have so far one question, which is directed at Professor Tamale. Professor Tamale, again, thank you. Professor Sylvia, thank you very much for offering your book. Personally, I'm a trogodolite. I've been trying to get a hard copy, but thank you for offering the book to us. It's very kind. It's very kind of you. I think another thing that for me, that is very important, because we say, we're saying that we are here in love, power, solidarity, and joy. Sometimes it's difficult to see the joy when we look at the enormity of what we are confronted with, the digital capitalism, the fact that our livelihoods in the form of our land, in the form of whatever can be taken from the land, are being decimated by the day. But I see from all our three panelists that there is a thread runs through it. Professor Sylvia said that let us not focus on the ideology that differentiates us, but rather to focus on what it is that unites us, and let us look for unity in our diversity. We don't all have to be the same, and we must remember that our march basically is to restore our history, our humanity, and our identity. And she referred to the scholars and academicians who I think were very important in shaping, in particular, Africa liberation from colonialism, the Kwame Nkrumahs. But I think part of the march of South Feminist Futures, which is why it was very important for us to have you, Professor, here, is that I want my daughter to be quoting from Sylvia Tamele's book. I quoted from Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere, but we now want to create our knowledge base based on us as African feminists, based as us as feminists in the Caribbean, feminists in Asia, feminists in the Pacific. So there was a question that was directed to you, Professor. I will just read it out. This is from Desiree Lewis. I hope I pronounce your name properly. Desiree is from South Africa. She says, thank you, especially for highlighting the neo-colonial monopolizing of critiques and anthropocentrism. Too much. This seems to be the new proving ground for radical and often feminist humanities scholars in the North. Yet this radical work obliterates and disparages the knowledge of ancient epistemologies that include Buddhism, yoga, and are often produced by African women. Much of this is being shamelessly repackaged. If there is time to take questions, could you please speak a little bit more about how and why African feminists should activate and recover and decolonize ways of being and knowing about the human, non-human binary? I'll hand over to you so that you can speak to that.
Yes, thank you very much. About sharing my book, let me be very clear. I think it is criminal to commodify knowledge, because we get knowledge from interviewing people, reading other people's work, and then you use copyright laws to gain profit from it. I think that is criminal. I mean, if it is a novel, creative work, that's another issue. But I think academic work should be open access. And I really, when I was looking for a publisher, I made sure that I look for a publisher who was willing to give open access to my book, because what's the point of writing if it is not to be disseminated? If you do it, and for us as feminists from the global North, it is even more important that we share knowledge, because that is how they've kept this stranglehold on us, because they keep us separated, in these disciplines, area studies, and different nation states and so on. And we really need to globalize knowledge. So I want to make that very, very clear. So even when you go to Daraja Press, their website, you can actually get a free copy, PDF copy, but I'm more than willing to send you one. I've put my email address in the chat room. So when you go to Daraja Press, where it asks for the PDF and it asks for the cost to contribute, just put $0 and you'll get it. Okay, back to the question. In my book, I quote Naeem Akbar, who uses the metaphor of, the African cosmos to a spider web. He says that it's its least element cannot be touched without making the whole vibrate. Everything is connected, interdependent, end quote. So that is the African belief that everything is interconnected. It is not a dualism, you know, it's not either or. So I think it's very important for us to revitalize our spirituality, you know, and our traditional practices, which protect ecosystems. And you know, in most of Africa, the violations, the protection of our ecosystems was done through taboos, you know, rendering something a taboo, you know, and it was not individualized. So if you broke a taboo, if you violated a taboo, it was considered a social responsibility. And it wasn't just you, but you and your family, or even your whole clan, that had to make good, you know. For example, there were taboos against sacred groves, forests, you know, plants seen, you know, in a spiritual sense. And of course, when the colonialists came, they told us that those are, they had all kinds of names for them. Those images that, what do they call them? I'm sure you know the terms. That is not religion. That is anti-God, and of course talking about the Western God, and that it is evil, it is sin, and you know, people started burning down and cutting down sacred trees, you know, which were through our traditions being kept, you know, maintained. So, you know, it was through ecological moral allegories, you know, stories. So I think ecofeminism lies in its ability to maintain, you know, a balance between the principles of feminism, green politics, and indigenous ontologies or indigenous ways of knowing, ways of being and knowledges. So we need to learn how to walk the fine line between utilizing nature's resources while protecting them, you know, to move away from the capitalist way of putting, you know, nature on the pedestal of profits.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Alejandra, I'm so pleased to finally meet you across continents. I don't even know what time it is in Ecuador, but and that we can speak. I don't speak Spanish, but yet I could hear you very clearly. And for me, one of the things that you said that spoke to me was that there is a process of emptying feminist discussion of content, and that, you know, the persons who are telling us that this is what we need to do, you know, we need to go and have salaries, we need to go and work, and yet there is no discussion or of what happens with care work. And you also spoke about corporate, you know, corporate feminism, and how it is again also helping to perhaps try and derail us in our march. I think a personal example is when the 25, I don't know whether you have 25 days of activism against gender-based violence. So when they started on the 25th of November, I got a message from my bank, you know, basically saying, I think they said something like, happy celebration of whatever. And my bank is actually very much deeply steeped in colonial extravism, because they were the chartered banks that were given charters by the Queen of England to come and basically haul out profit from Africa. So yeah, there is that way you have corporates who are now being, I don't know what they call it, gender savvy, and they send us this message. And the question that you ask is that how do we unite, our transformative vision with social justice? And I think this is an important question. I don't actually want rehash what has been said, because I don't think I can do it justice. So I am asking the attendees, because we do have quite a few attendees, and if people are not going to be forthcoming, because I do know who is on the chat, I shall ask people to make contributions. But if you are looking at the chat, I think we are all very grateful and very inspired by the three of you. I don't know, Claire, whether you would like to say something to the panelists. Claire Matwansi.
We have, sorry, I'm going to be a party pooper and say we have 4 minutes left.
Yeah.
So
I thought we had,
no, we have 4 minutes left.
I thought we had 30 minutes left.
No, it's a 1.5 hour.
Oh dear.
Sorry,
Okay.
Saru. Sorry,
Okay.
Saru.
Okay, so can we please ask, our panelists to maybe sum up?
Last thoughts, yes.
Yeah.
If you want, no pressure, yeah.
Well, very briefly, I want once again to thank this initiative. I don't know who came up with the first thought that let's put this together. But as they say, huge doors are propped by two small hinges, and it takes a few people to think about something and make it happen. And you made this happen. I was so excited. I've been so exhausted doing so many book launches, and and now I've got a standard response to invitations for discussion of mine, because I'm so tired. I need to think about my health, but I could not say no to this one, because it really excited me. I think we should not let it die. It is so important that we collaborate across continents, because we have similar challenges. We have, we need to share our successes, our strategies, and we didn't have any platforms to do that from before. And I think although these virtual meetings have their setbacks, I think they, in many ways, they have a silver lining, in that people who would never have, been in these spaces to listen and share and think and reflect, now have the opportunity from wherever corner of the world we're in. So I really think, I really hope that SFF and AFF, and I'm hoping that the other continents also have their own forums, because it's always good. In African Feminist Forum, we also have national forums, and it is those national forums that feed the continental forums, and hopefully the continental forums will feed our Southern initiative. But thank you very, very much, and it is very, very exciting. I'm really, really excited about this initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. We'll count on your support and your joining us. We'll have many more of this. So thank you so much for those wonderful words of encouragement. Ave, do you want to take a minute to share your final thoughts? Yeah.
Sí, bueno, también me sumo a las palabras de Silvia. Estoy súper agradecida de este espacio. Creo que es una muestra de cómo las feministas cuando nos organizamos y autogestionamos, a pesar de que estamos corriendo todo el tiempo y estamos sobrecargadas de trabajo, logramos sacar espacios tan bonitos y potentes como estos, ¿no es cierto?, en donde la autonomía y la autogestión es justamente el secreto de nuestra gran potencia feminista. Y creo que eso tiene que ver mucho con la discusión de cómo pensamos el poder, el entre nosotras, y cómo decidimos conjuntamente y acordamos cómo nos vamos a relacionar con el Estado, con el poder en masculino, con los otros espacios más institucionales, ¿no? La idea no es negarnos necesariamente a la relación, pero sí plantearnos y discutirnos cuál es la relación que nosotras queremos, precisamente porque el Estado y el capital lo que siempre hacen es domesticar y traducir nuestra potencialidad radical y revolucionaria en un orden, ¿no es cierto?, que nunca termina de destruirse y de desmontarse, ¿no? Eso es lo que yo decía de vaciamiento. Creo finalmente que es fundamental, y ahí quise decir dos elementos más. Creo que nuestros países del sur global, justamente por esta histórica y cruel división internacional del trabajo, nos remiten a discusiones en donde por ejemplo, digamos, el movimiento feminista y sus aportes en la economía del cuidado tienen mucho que decir en relación a las economías familiares campesinas, al ecofeminismo, a lo que los pueblos y nacionalidades indígenas nos han mostrado. Creo que seguir ahondando en esas articulaciones, ¿no es cierto?, son fundamentales. Es decir, no podemos construir formas de redistribución territorial y de justicia si no cambiamos también la reorganización social de los cuidados y la división sexual del trabajo. O sea, y tampoco si es que sigue persistiendo la violencia contra nosotras, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo pensamos, ¿no? La profesora Silvia decía hace un rato, necesitamos matemáticas, historia, sociología, literatura, una serie de elementos para pensar el mundo. Yo diría, hay que apuntar a construir feminismos que desbordan todo, feminismos del desborde, y también feminismos que nos permiten una perspectiva de la totalidad, precisamente porque el sistema lo que quiere es fragmentar nuestras luchas y nuestras capacidades de cómo miramos el mundo, ¿no? Y en esa medida, la lucha por la memoria y la disputa del sentido histórico sigue siendo fundamental para los pueblos y para las mujeres del sur global, ¿no? Y es cómo contamos nuestra historia de luchas, cómo hacemos yo estaba pensando ahorita que les escuchaba, decía, qué hermoso sería tener una especie de cátedra libre de memorias de las luchas de las mujeres, ¿no es cierto?, del sur global, y contarnos entre nosotras cómo hemos venido luchando en cada uno de los espacios, ¿no?, por el agua, por la tierra, contra el racismo, contra las transnacionales, contra la violencia, por el derecho a decidir. Cómo sumamos esas luchas que, si bien no todas se llaman feministas o no se llamaron feministas en un momento, siguen siendo claves en el sentido de que somos nosotras las que imprimimos una mirada profunda, digamos, y revolucionaria también en nuestros espacios, ¿no? Pensar en una perspectiva de recuperación de las memorias y de contar las memorias de las mujeres y las luchas en el sur global, creo yo que puede ahondar y aunar a pensar una teoría o unas teorías de la lucha, ¿no? Unas teorías de la lucha social y política de las mujeres del sur global. Con eso me despido, les agradezco muchísimo por el espacio, me encanta haberlas conocido y bueno, nada, voy a buscarlas más para leerlas, ahora que tenemos la oportunidad de compartir un panel. Y gracias al trabajo de traducción de todas también.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank, we have to wrap up. I want to thank both Alejandra and Sylvia for joining us. I want to thank the South Feminist Futures Festival organizing team. That's the team that put this together, volunteering their time and their minds. And I want to thank the interpreters. We could not have had a South-South conversation if we didn't have you. So thank you so much for your work, for your labor. And thank you for your support, Mama Cash, Urgent Action Fund, and AWDF. That was a show of support and sisterhood as well. So thank you. And thank you everyone who joined us. Please do check out our program. There are many more sessions for the rest of the week. as great as this, even greater. Although this was fantastic, unparalleled. But yes, do check out our program. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you.